My name is Dr. Miriam Chen, and I was 37 when I learned that being the one who fixed things meant I was the one who could be dismantled. I was 37 when I stood in the conference room of a hospital I had helped design and watched my father hand a plaque to my brother for work I had done. The plaque was brass. It had my brother's name on it. It said outstanding contribution to healthcare infrastructure. My brother had never read a blueprint in his life. He had never reviewed a load-bearing calculation. No. He had never spent a weekend on a construction site with a hard hat and a clipboard, and the quiet certainty that if he missed one specification, the building would fail. I grew up in a house where excellence was expected and visibility was reserved. My parents were both physicians. They had built a practice from nothing, a small clinic in a strip mall that had grown into a regional medical group. They talked about legacy the way other families talked about vacations. Legacy was the word they used when they meant my brother. Visual. A conference room. A brass plaque on a wooden podium. The name Daniel Chen engraved in block letters. Behind it, a glass wall overlooking a hospital lobby. When I was 9 years old, I built a model of the human heart out of clay and toothpicks and a set of colored beads my mother had in her sewing drawer. I spent 3 weekends on it. I labeled every chamber. I painted the arteries red and the veins blue. I brought it to the clinic and set it on my father's desk. He looked at it for a moment. He said, "Very neat, Miriam. Daniel is playing baseball today. His coach says he has a good arm." I did not play baseball. I had never been asked. When I was 14, I scored in the 99th percentile on the math section of a standardized test. My mother looked at the score sheet and nodded. She said, "That's useful. Daniel is going to need help with his science coursework." I tutored Daniel for 3 hours every Tuesday. He was taking biology. He was failing. I explained cellular respiration to him 4 times. He passed with a C-. My mother told the neighbors that Daniel had worked so hard. I received a thank you card. It said, "Thanks, Miriam." Oh, it did not have a stamp. No. That was the shape of my childhood. I was the one who understood the material, who fixed the grades, who made the models. Daniel was the one who got the credit. I was the mechanic. He was the owner. I thought it would change when we grew up. It did not. It only became more expensive. The project was called the Westbrook Pavilion. It was a 5-story outpatient surgical center attached to the main hospital where my father had been chief of staff for 17 years. My father had not designed the pavilion. He had not raised the capital for it. He had not managed the construction timeline. He had not stayed up until 3 in the morning, reconciling a budget discrepancy that threatened to delay the opening by 6 months. I had done all of those things. I had done them because I was the director of facilities, planning for the hospital system. I had been in that role for 11 years. 11 years. I had started as a junior analyst in the facilities department. I had worked my way up by being the person who could read a mechanical engineering report and translate it into plain language. I was the person who could walk a construction site and spot a discrepancy between the architectural drawings and the electrical plans. I was the person who could call a contractor at 6 in the morning and explain without raising my voice that the steel reinforcement for the 3rd floor had not been installed to code and that the entire shipment would need to be redone. I was the person who could do that because I had learned, at the age of 9, that being good at something was not the same as being seen. The Westbrook Pavilion was my project. I had written the initial proposal. I had secured the state funding. I had negotiated with the construction firm. I had signed off on every design decision. My name was on the internal documents. My name was on the project charter. My name was on the budget spreadsheets and the timeline Gantt charts and the risk assessment matrices. My name was everywhere that mattered. But my name was not on the plaque. Visual. A construction site. A hard hat on a stack of blueprints. The blueprints have the name Chen, M in the corner. A coffee cup with a logo that says Westbrook Pavilion Project. The plaque ceremony was held 6 weeks after the pavilion opened. It was a formal event. There were speeches. There were ribbon cuttings. There were people from the state health department and the city council and the board of trustees. My father was the keynote speaker. He stood at the podium in a navy suit, and he talked about the legacy of the Chen family in healthcare. He talked about how his father had been a general practitioner in a small town. He talked about how his own career had been dedicated to serving the community. He talked about how his son Daniel had stepped up to lead the pavilion project. I was sitting in the third row. I was wearing a dress I had bought for the occasion. I had bought it on sale. It was navy blue, like my father's suit. I did not wear it to match him. I wore it because I thought it would look professional. I thought it would make me look like someone who belonged in a conference room with a brass plaque and a ribbon. Daniel was sitting in the front row. He had been the hospital's community liaison for 4 years. His job was to attend events and shake hands. He did not know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition wall. He did not know that the third-floor steel had been shipped from a mill in Ohio. He did not know that the HVAC system had been delayed by a manufacturing defect, and that I had personally called the supplier 23 times to expedite the replacement parts. He did not know any of that, but he was receiving the plaque. My father called Daniel to the podium. Daniel smiled, and not smiled. He shook my father's hand. He posed for a photograph with the plaque held at chest level. "Oh, nothing here, dude." He said, "Thank you, Dad. Thank you for trusting me with this project." The phrase came the first time at the reception afterward. There was champagne. There were shrimp cocktails. There were small conversations happening in clusters around the room. I was standing near the window. I was looking at the pavilion through the glass. It was a good building. It was a solid building. It had been built on time and under budget because I had made it so. My mother approached me. She was wearing a silk blouse and a strand of pearls. She touched my arm. She said, "Miriam, you must be so proud of your brother." I looked at her. "I built that building," I said. No, it was not a dramatic statement. It was just a fact. It was a fact that she knew. Now and attempted to. She smiled. She patted my arm. "Yes, dear. But Daniel is the one who represents the family. You understand." That was the first time I heard the phrase in its final form. You understand? Genau. Asida Midioni. It was not a question. It was a dismissal. It was a way of saying that my labor was acknowledged, but my recognition was not owed. It was a way of saying that being good at things was not the same as being credited. It was a way of saying that I had been built for usefulness, not for visibility. I stayed at the reception for another 40 minutes. I shook hands. I smiled. Yeah. I accepted compliments on my brother's behalf. I told people that the pavilion was a great asset to the community. I told people that the design was modern and efficient. I told people that the construction had gone smoothly. I did not say that I was the one who had made it smooth. I did not say that I was the one who had designed it. I smiled, and I nodded, and I watched my brother accept credit for a building he had never seen being built. The mechanism was a contract. Every capital project in the hospital system was governed by a set of standard agreements between the system and the state health department. The agreements were designed to ensure that public funds were spent properly. They included reporting requirements, audit provisions, and a specific clause about conflict of interest. The conflict of interest clause was routine. It said that any board member or executive with a financial interest in a project had to disclose that interest and recuse themselves from certain decisions. It was boilerplate. It was boring. It was the kind of clause that most people skimmed. I had read it 17 times. I had read it 17 times because I had been thinking about the phrase. You understand? I had been thinking about what it meant to be the one who understood, the one who built, the one who fixed. I had been thinking about the difference between being valued and being used. I had been thinking about the fact that my father had been on the board that approved the Westbrook Pavilion project. I had been thinking about the fact that my father had also been a partner in the construction firm that had been awarded the contract. I had been thinking about the fact that no one had ever disclosed that relationship. I had been thinking about the fact that I was the only person in the hospital system who had read the conflict of interest clause closely enough to notice that the disclosure requirement was not optional. I did not decide to trigger the clause on the night of the plaque ceremony. No, I decided to trigger it 3 days later, when my father called me to say that Daniel had been offered a promotion. The promotion was for a position called Vice President of Facilities and Capital Planning. It was my position. It was the position I had held for 11 years. It was the position that had been created for me, that had been shaped by me, that had been defined by the work I did. My father said Daniel was a natural fit. He said the board was excited about fresh leadership. He said I would understand. That was the second time. You understand? It was delivered over the phone. It was delivered with the same tone my mother had used when she told me Daniel was the one who represented the family. It was delivered with the casual certainty of someone who had never questioned the arrangement. I said, "When does the promotion take effect?" He said, "In 3 weeks. The board voted yesterday." I said, "Okay." I hung up the phone. I walked to my desk. I opened a filing cabinet. I pulled out a folder that was labeled Conflict of Interest, Westbrook. I had been assembling it for 11 months. It contained copies of the board meeting minutes, the construction firm's partnership agreements, the financial disclosures that my father had signed. It contained a spreadsheet that tracked the payments made to the construction firm and cross-referenced them with my father's share of the partnership. It contained a letter from the State Health Department's Compliance Division, requesting information about a related matter. The request had been routine. It had not been about my father specifically, but it had created a paper trail. Visual: a filing cabinet drawer, a folder with a yellow label. Inside it, a spreadsheet printed on legal paper, columns of numbers, a highlighted row. I had been collecting the documents because I was the one who understood. I had been collecting them because understanding meant seeing the structure, and seeing the structure meant knowing where the weak points were. I had not been planning to use them. I had been collecting them the way I collected blueprints, as a hedge against incompetence. But the phone call changed that. The promotion changed that. The phrase, delivered for the second time, changed that. The mechanism was the conflict of interest clause and the compliance review process it required. I knew that if I submitted the documents to the state health department, they would have to launch an investigation. I knew that the investigation would expose the undisclosed relationship between the board and the construction firm. I knew that the exposure would invalidate the approval of any capital project that had been influenced by that relationship. I knew that the Westbrook Pavilion would be subject to an audit. I knew that the audit would reveal that my father had participated in the vote that awarded the contract to the firm in which he held a partnership. I knew that the state would demand restitution. Well, I knew that the hospital system would have to pay back a portion of the funding. I knew that the board would have to explain why they had not followed the rules. I submitted the documents on a Tuesday. I faxed them to the State Health Department's Compliance Division. I did not send an email. I did not leave a voicemail. I faxed them because faxes leave a record. The confirmation slip said the transmission was successful. I put the confirmation slip in the folder. I closed the filing cabinet. I made a cup of tea. The investigation began 6 weeks later. The first sign was a phone call from the hospital's general counsel. She was a woman named Delacroix. She was calm and precise. She asked if I had any knowledge of a disclosure issue related to the Westbrook project. I said I had been the project lead and I had access to all records. She asked if I had ever seen a conflict of interest disclosure from any board member. I said I had not. Nay, I did not mention the documents. I did not mention the facts. I let the silence do the work. The second sign was a letter from the board. It arrived by certified mail. It was addressed to all department heads. It announced a review of procurement procedures and requested that all files related to capital projects be made available for audit. It was written in bureaucratic language. It was carefully neutral. Not what tempts you. It did not mention any specific project or any specific board member, but I knew what it meant. The mechanism was firing. The third sign was the day my father called me to ask if I knew anything about a compliance issue. He was not calm. He was not precise. He was using words like witch hunt and political agenda and departmental overreach. He was not asking. He was accusing. Miriam, you must know something about this. You were the project lead. You were the one who handled the paperwork. He was right. I was the one who handled the paperwork. That was the point. I had handled the paperwork for 11 years. I had handled it so well that no one else had ever read it. I handle paperwork, I said. I don't handle conflicts of interest. That was the third time the phrase had been used. He said it in his office. He said it in front of his secretary. He said it with the same tone he had used when I was 9 years old, and he was looking at my clay heart. He said it like he was telling a child that her project was neat but not important. He said it like he was telling a daughter that she was useful but not essential. He said it, and I understood. No, I understood that he had never seen me. He had never seen the building. He had never seen the 11 years. He had only seen the output, the product, the result of a machine that he assumed was meant to serve him. The hearing was held in the state health department's offices. It was a formal proceeding. There were lawyers. There were compliance officers. There was a hearing officer named Whitfield who had been reviewing these cases for 23 years. He had a small office with a window that faced a parking garage. He had a file folder on his desk. The folder had my name on it. Me was on land. I'd be one sir. I would text you. Visual. A small office with a window. A man in a suit. A file folder on a desk. The name Chen, invisible through the glassine window of the folder. Whitfield asked me if I was Dr. Miriam Chen. No, I said I was. He asked if I had been the project lead for the Westbrook Pavilion. I said I had. He asked if I had any knowledge of a conflict of interest involving the construction firm. I opened my bag. I pulled out a folder. The folder was the same one I had been assembling for 11 months. It had grown. It now contained the original documents, the compliance letters, the audit request, and a second spreadsheet that tracked the financial impact of the undisclosed relationship. I had prepared it carefully. I had prepared it the way I prepared all my reports. Thoroughly, accurately, and without emotion. I set the folder on the desk. I slid it toward Whitfield. He opened it. He read the cover sheet. He read the first page. He read the second page. He read the entire document in silence. The silence lasted 6 minutes. I counted. I was sitting in a chair facing his desk. I was wearing a dark blazer and a pair of glasses. I was not sweating. I was not shaking. I was not angry. I was just sitting there waiting for him to finish reading. When he finished, he looked at me. He asked a procedural question. He asked if I had verified the authenticity of the documents. I said I had. Then he asked if I had any personal interest in the outcome. I said no. He asked if I understood the consequences of the disclosure. I said I understood. He closed the folder. He made a note on his pad. He said the investigation would proceed. He said there would be a formal finding. The issue was. He said the finding would be made public. No. He said my role as a witness would be documented. Now, and my case would be documented. He said I could leave. I left the office. I walked past the parking garage. I walked to the train station. I took the train back to my apartment. I did not tell anyone where I had been. I did not tell anyone what I had done. I just went home and sat in the living room. The living room had a couch and a lamp and a stack of books. I read one of the books. It was about architecture. It was written by a woman. It did not mention me. The finding was issued 4 months later. The state health department determined that the conflict of interest disclosure had been a requirement. They determined that my father had violated the requirement. They determined that the violation had influenced the approval of the construction contract. They determined that the hospital system had received public funds in an amount that required restitution. The restitution amount was $2.6 million. $2.6 million. That was the number that appeared in the formal findings. That was the number that was reported in the local newspaper. That was the number that my father had to pay back. He could not pay it back in cash. He had to pay it back by liquidating assets. He had to sell his partnership in the construction firm. He had to sell his interest in several medical office buildings. He had to sell the vacation home. The vacation home was a small cottage on a lake. I had spent summers there. I had spent them reading on the porch and swimming in the water and avoiding the conversations about what Daniel was doing with his life. The cottage was not mine. It had never been mine. But I had helped maintain it. I had filed the property tax payments. I had scheduled the roof repairs. I had coordinated the winterization. I had done all of that because I was the one who understood. And now it was being sold. Visual: a small cottage on a lake, a sign that says for sale, a rowboat in the yard. The rowboat is overturned. My father's partnership in the construction firm was also sold. The firm was purchased by a larger competitor. The new firm did not have a place for my father. He was too old, they said. They said it politely. They said it in a letter. The letter was delivered to his office. I did not see the letter. I heard about it from my mother. She called me to tell me that my father had stepped down from his position. She did not use the word fired. I knew. She did not use the word forced. She used the word step down. She said it like it was his choice. Daniel did not get the promotion. He had been named in the investigation as a beneficiary of the undisclosed relationship. He had known about the partnership. He had not reported it. He had not disclosed it. He had simply accepted the plaque and the promotion and the assumption that he was the one who mattered. When the investigation went public, his name appeared in the newspaper. The article said he had been implicated in a conflict of interest matter. It said he was under review. It did not say he was guilty. But it said enough. He did not get the promotion. He did not keep the community liaison job. He was reassigned to a position in the hospitality department, where he handled patient meal complaints. My mother called me a fourth time. This time, the phrase appeared. It appeared in its final form. She said, "Miriam, I know you understand, but I need you to tell them that you made a mistake. I need you to tell them that the documents were misread. I need you to fix this. You always fix things." That was the third time. You always fix things. It was the same phrase with a different verb. It was the same assumption with a different coat. It was the same expectation that I would use my skill to repair the damage that had been done by the very system that had made me invisible. I did not answer her request. I did not say I would fix it. I said, "I understand." That was the fourth time. I understand. I said it in a flat voice. I said it in the voice I had learned to use when I was being assigned a task I did not want. I said it in the voice of a 9-year-old being told to put down the clay heart and go do something useful. I said it and I hung up the phone. The final resolution came 18 months after the investigation. The hospital system had paid back the $2.6 million. The funding had been restructured. The board had been reconstituted. My father had resigned. Daniel had been reassigned. The Westbrook Pavilion was still standing. It was still a solid building. It was still a good building. But no one talked about it anymore. No one talked about the plaque. No one talked about the ribbon cutting. The whole event had been tainted. The whole legacy had been reversed. I received a letter from the State Health Department. The letter commended me for my cooperation. It said my testimony had been instrumental in the investigation. It said I had demonstrated professional integrity. It enclosed a certificate of recognition. The certificate was printed on heavy paper. Oh no, it had a gold seal. It was not a plaque. It was not brass, but it was mine. I framed the certificate. I hung it in my office. The office was not the same one I had had before. I had been offered the vice president position after Daniel was reassigned. I had declined. I had accepted a position in a different department. The department was small. Oh, it was focused on planning and development. It was quieter. It did not have a plaque. It did not have a legacy. It just had work. Visual. A small office. A certificate in a frame. The certificate has a gold seal. A desk with a single monitor. A coffee cup with a logo that says Planning and Development. The new position paid less than the vice president role would have paid. It was less visible. It was less prestigious. But it was mine. It was work I had chosen. It was work that was not tied to a family name. It was not tied to a father who needed to be impressed. It was not tied to a brother who needed to be promoted. It was just work. I have not spoken to my father in 2 years. He sent me a card once. It was a birthday card. It had a generic message printed inside. He signed it Dad. There is no other note. I put the card in a drawer. I did not call him. I have spoken to Daniel once. He called me on the anniversary of the investigation. He said he had thought about things. He said he didn't realize how much I had done. He said he didn't mean to take credit. He did not say he was sorry. He said he understood. I do not think he understood. I think he was trying to close a door. I think he was trying to move on. I said, "Thank you for the call." I did not say anything else. My mother has called several times. She has left messages. The messages are long. They talk about the family. They talk about the legacy. They talk about how things fell apart. They do not mention the plaque. They do not mention the conflict of interest. They do not mention the $2.6 million. They mention me as a footnote. They say I am welcome to visit. They say the house is quieter now. I have not visited. Now I'm going to I will not visit. The phone is not entirely silent, but it is silent in the ways that matter. The calls that come are from people who know what I did. They are calls about work. They are calls about planning and development. They are calls about buildings. Buildings are straightforward. Buildings do not have mothers or fathers or brothers. Buildings do not hand out plaques to the wrong person. Buildings just stand there. They do what they are designed to do. I design buildings now. I design them for a living. I do not design them for my father. I do not design them for a hospital board. I design them for communities. I design them for patients. I design them for people who will never know my name. That is fine. I do not need to be known. I need to be useful. But I need to be useful on my own terms. I need to be the one who decides what understanding means. Visual, a drawing board, a blueprint. The blueprint shows a small clinic. And the name on the blueprint is Chen, M.U. The drawing is clean and precise. I am Miriam Chen. I am 37. I have a certificate on my wall, and a building on a hill, and a brother who does not call and a father who sends cards with no words. I have a phrase that I have returned to its owner. You understand? That is what they said. And I do. I understand that being the one who builds does not mean being the one who owns. I understand that being the one who fixes does not mean being the one who is fixed. I understand that being useful is not the same as being valued. And I understand that the most important thing I ever built was not the pavilion. It was the quiet room I built for myself after I walked away. I understand that now. Nay, too.